having that quitting mindset, it tends to be very self-destructive, and it gets stronger over time. So don't quit. Stay in the game. If they've got to carry you off the 15th green because you've just collapsed physically and mentally, fine. That's not the same thing as quitting. But walking in after 12, that's going to start to build a pattern. And every time that things aren't going well for you on the golf course, you're going to be thinking about how far is it to the clubhouse right now, because that feels better than hanging in there and trying to make something out of what's going on.
Dr. Mark Lowry, tell me about Winning Mind, and tell me how it is that you found yourself helping the elite of the elite be elite.
Sure. Well, I go back to the beginning and work my way up to what is now Winning Mind. Ever since I was a little boy, I knew I wanted to go in the Army. So got an ROTC scholarship to attend undergraduate. And had an obligation to go in the Army, but I went to graduate school before going in and got my PhD in clinical psychology. And after that, went into the Army and discovered I didn't really enjoy doing typical clinical psychology, which is, therapy with people who are struggling with mental problems. Fortunately, the military, the Army at that time, was just developing a new way to utilize psychologists in the special operations part of the community, and I was, very lucky to get one of those jobs, working with a group of helicopter pilots. And the main job there was, on the front end, participating in their selection process, trying to evaluate them from a mental perspective to see if they had the right makeup to be able to come in that unit and perform at a much higher level than what the regular Army aviators were performing at. So I got a front row seat to some very elite level performers right off the bat with my career, and really spent time observing, flying with them, trying to figure out, from a psychological perspective, what does it take to do what they do at night using night vision goggles and flying under very difficult circumstances. After I finished with the aviators, then I had a chance to move over to the ground operator side. So the special forces guys on the ground, again, participating in the selection process, but then also once they were in the organization, working with them to help strengthen their mental game and be able to handle the stress, the pressure, the rigors, the demanding conditions that they operate under. So again, I'm just very blessed to have had those experiences early on in my career and really see what elite level performers are all about and what the difference is between those folks and the folks that are more, like you and I, no offense, but there is quite a difference both physically and mentally. When I left the military, I went to work for a guy who was one of the sort of the gurus or founding fathers of the whole sports psychology movement here in the U.S., a guy named Bob Niederfer. I had learned to use a psychological assessment that he developed for use with elite level athletes when I was in the military, and we were using it with the Army guys. I went to work for him, and he had a consultancy that not only had military clients but also had sport clients and corporate clients. So I got a chance to get beyond just the military folks and then work with elite level athletes and then folks in the corporate world who are operating at very high levels within organizations. After a few years of working at Niederfer's firm, myself and my current partner sort of spun off Winning Mind. That was in 2001. And again, it's the same sort of work. It's working with business folks, with athletes, and with the military, with a focus on improving performance by enhancing the mental game. That's in a big nutshell, the journey.
Sure. I want to get into what the differences are between those people and people like myself. Mm-hmm. But I think if we could just define sort of performance, peak elite performance, however you want to describe it, how would you define that?
Sure. Well, in any type of performance, regardless of what it is you do for a living, there are three three components that go into determining how somebody performs. There's a physical aspect to it, there's a technical aspect to it, and then there's a mental aspect to it. So the physical is size, strength, agility, those types of things. The technical piece of it might be shooting. It might be hitting a golf ball. It might be, making the types of decisions that leaders in businesses have to make. And then the mental part of it is the final piece of it. And the mental part of performance is really there to support the other two. When your mental game is working correctly for you, what it's giving you the chance to do is to perform up to a level that's consistent with your physical and technical abilities. There's no magic to it. It's not going to make you, go from hitting a drive 250 yards to hitting a drive 300 yards. You want to do that, then you're going to have to improve physically and technically. What the mental game is going to do is allow you to hit the golf ball more consistently up to whatever capabilities you have. So the biggest difference between elite performers and the rest of us really comes in terms of that technical and physical aspect. They just have the tools to play the game better, whatever the game is. It could be flying a helicopter. It could be hitting a golf shot. It could be, leading a business team. They've just got better skills. And what ends up determining the difference oftentimes between winning and losing at an elite level is how effectively that performer is able to keep it together between their ears. Some of the best the best athletes in the world are the ones that are able to perform consistently and don't have the same kind of ups and downs that a lot of other professionals have because they've got a strong mental game. So
the mental aspect is merely there to support the physical and technical. And like we said, you told me beforehand, we did this interview, I'm not going to teach anyone how to hit the ball better than they already know how. You can just do it consistently. Right. So would you say that the chase for elite performance revolves around just the consistency part, that physical and that technical side has been developed and trained and ingrained, and we are now just that is what separates the best of the best? Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you're looking at professional athletes, they're playing a different game, no matter what the game is, than the rest of us play, and that's why they're at that level. Everybody that's out there earning a living playing golf can hit the ball a mile. They can hit greens. They can make putts. They can shoot under par. The question is, can they do it when they need to? And that's really where the mental game comes in. Because when I say when you need to, it's under the pressures of competition, and pressure changes things, and pressure puts a premium on how effectively you're able to manage your mental game. And that's really the differentiator for folks. When we see it all the time. We don't tend to notice when the mental game is working well for somebody who's winning, but we definitely notice it when somebody collapses. And that's it. It's the pressures. It changes the way that your mind is operating, and it changes, and that in turn impacts your ability to perform technically and physically. That's that kind of mind-body connection. Sure. I want to talk about pressure too today, but I'd like to start with the assessment part, especially for athletes. Your website says that we can tell you what makes people succeed or fail in a surprisingly short period of time. So without revealing any trade secrets of yours, how is that? Sure. Well, the assessment that I referenced earlier that I learned how to use when I was in the military that this guy, Bob Nidifer, developed is called the Attentional and Interpersonal Style Inventory. And so what Nidifer did way back in the day was he sat down and he created a theory of what's going on with an athlete under the pressures of competition from a psychological perspective. What sorts of things matter? And after he established that theory, then he developed this assessment as a way of measuring those critical variables in an athlete's mental game. And since it's been applied in the military, obviously, and with business people, we use the same assessment because at the end of the day, it's the same contributing factors. What's creating the pressure or stress is a little bit different. In the military, maybe somebody's shooting at you with the intention of taking your life away from you.
on the battlefields of sports, somebody's trying to beat you and take money away from you. And in the business world, it's the same sort of pressures, and our mind reacts to it the same way, regardless of the intensity of that pressure. So the assessment itself is split into two components. And this was one of the unique things of Niederfer's theory and the assessment was it's one of the only ones that considers the role that concentration plays in performance. When you think about it, if you're trying to, you're trying to go out and shoot a low score in the golf course, how effectively you're managing your concentration or attention or focus is a huge contributing factor. Are you paying attention to the right things at the right time? And are you able to avoid getting distracted by irrelevant things? That's all a part of how our mind manages what we're paying attention to and how effectively we're paying attention to the right things. And so the assessment gets at how good is your concentration. And concentration is another part of the theory. Is it's not just a singular thing. It's not dad on the sideline screaming, "Hey, pay attention, focus." That is a component of it, but attention is more complicated than that, and understanding it is essential to being able to perform effectively and utilize the mental game. So I'm happy to go into the details of it a little bit, and I can use a golf example as a way of kind of illustrating what it's all about. So imagine that your attention varies along two dimensions. One dimension is width. And width is basically going from broad to narrow. Broad means I can pay attention to a lot of things simultaneously. Narrow means I'm focused down on just one thing. I'm looking at the golf ball as I'm standing over a putt. The other dimension is direction, and it goes from internal to external. Internal means I'm up inside my head. Thoughts, feelings, whatever other nonsense is going on up there, that's internal. External means I'm paying attention to the world around me. When you combine those two different dimensions, you end up with 4 different types of concentration. And we use sort of a channel analogy to illustrate that. So channel 1 would be broad and external at the same time. And so you can use it's kind of a pre-shot routine as a great example of it. So broad external is you've hit your drive, you walk up to it, and you start to gather data. You're looking at yardage, you're looking at the lie of the golf ball, you're looking at slope, you're trying to get a sense for where the pin is on the green, what's the wind doing. All of those variables that you're picking up that's going on in that external world is coming in through that broad external type of concentration. Once you've gathered all the data, then the next step is to turn to channel 2. And channel 2 is a broad internal channel. And this is where you take that data and you analyze it and come up with a plan. All right, I got 150 yards, so for me that's an 8-iron, and I got a little bit of wind behind me, so I got to be careful that I'm not going to overcook this one. And you start to formulate a plan based on the data that you've gathered. That's channel 2. Once you've formulated that plan, then you move to channel 3, which is kind of committing yourself to what the plan was that you just came up with. Some athletes will go through sort of an imagery exercise at that point in time. They're in their head and they're sort of watching themselves hit the shot that they've just planned on hitting. And then once that's done, then it's time to address the golf ball, and you need to shift into channel 4, which is a broad external type of focus. So that may be for some golfers, you're just going to stare at the golf ball, or there for some like when I'm playing well, what I'm trying to do is I'm standing over the golf ball is just imagine where the target is, nothing else. What you don't want to be doing when you're standing over the golf ball is thinking about executing the golf swing, because that's now taking you back into a channel 2, channel 3 sort of thing, and it's very difficult to perform effectively when you're doing that. It's okay to be doing that when you're practicing. I'm focusing on doing one thing. But when you're playing, you're either playing golf or you're playing golf swing. And when people are playing golf swing, they're trying to do things, and they're not using that channel 4 type of focus. The best the best performance is going to be when you can shut off all of that stuff and just really engage with the game and with the target as you're executing things. What you're trying to accomplish is sort of automatic type of performance. Just that where you're not thinking about doing anything other than just executing the shot, not not where is the club at the top of my backswing, what am I shifting my weight, all of those things are fine for practice. But if you're doing that while you're trying to play, you just have to accept the fact that you're not going to play your best golf. So that kind of takes through the concentration piece of it. And again, effective playing is being on the right channel at the right time. So if you're standing over the golf ball and you realize that you're in your head and you're thinking about this or that, or don't do this or don't do that, that's a signal where you need to step away, start again. Okay, within the confines of not being ridiculously slow and pissing off your playing partners. But if you're serious about hitting the best shot you can, you want to make sure that you're not engaged in the nonsense sort of stuff as you're standing over the golf ball. If you are, you just got to accept that you're probably not going to hit a great shot. The second part of the assessment really gets into more of the traditional sort of personality factors, things like self-confidence and tolerance for risk and communication style and people orientation, which aren't critical when you're thinking about a golfer, but in other types of performance they can be a big deal. Team sports, for example, certainly in the business world, those interpersonal skills are critically important. And so it's the interplay between those two. And what happens under pressure, what creates pressure for people, is oftentimes a result of those interpersonal factors and it contributing to a moment of doubt, essentially. That's what elevates pressure when you're standing there, whatever it is you're going to do, and what's going through your mind is, I don't know if I'm going to do this well. That's where pressure starts to get out of control and starts to impact everything else. Your body tightens up. It's difficult to execute smooth muscle movements under those conditions. That's the one where the 18th tee box and the guy's holding on to the golf club just a little too tightly, and all of a sudden he's in the woods on the right. The pressure has created a change in how the body is operating. It's no longer happening automatically because of that doubt and that nonsense. So we can look at those test results and basically say, these are the types of things that are going to take you out of your comfort zone. When you do, these are the types of mistakes that you're probably going to make. It does help us get at what are your mental game strengths. Mm-hmm. Those are fine to know. And anytime that you can be operating and taking advantage of those strengths, you're going to have an advantage. But the strengths are not going to be where your performance starts to decrease. It's those weak spots, it's those vulnerabilities. And so we're good at being able to get at what's going to get in your way, not what's going to make you good. That's fine. What's going to get in your way from being even better or more consistently good? And TACE is something that I've been using for 30 years now, and it's great at getting at those things.
That's fascinating. I want to jump back to the concentration part. So just so I have it right, so the channels are not. This isn't like a plot graph where you are, you have two of the qualities, external, internal, and broad and narrow, and you're plotted like you're good at these things. This is something you have to use all four and shift through, especially in the golfers. When we're talking about golf, you actually have to sort of make your way through the channels.
Sure. And
leverage each part of it.
What you'll see in somebody's profile is that certain parts of that concentration system are going to be stronger than others. So let's take the typical business leader. Okay. That person is usually going to be strongest in that analytical part of it, that broad internal planning, strategizing, big picture focus. Same thing with military officers. That's typically where their strength is. And they're good at what they do because that's what they get paid to do. If you're in charge of something, then it's that broad, big picture focus, that ability to plan and strategize and set others up for success that is really going to be the engine. You have to use the other ones, but what's going to be strong typically in the profile is that. You talk about individual sport athletes or military operators, it's that narrow type of focus that they tend to be best at. If you think about what it takes to develop world-class golfing abilities, well, you're out hitting golf balls forever and a day. And that requires a tremendous amount of focus to do that. I remember one time Nick Faldo describing one of the years when he won the Masters and being out there on Sunday and basically saying, all I was aware of was what was going on, within about 3 feet of me. And I depended upon Fanny, remember the female caddy that he had back in the day? She took care of everything else because I was right in here. And you think about a guy like Faldo, that was it. And those concentration abilities are then factored into what we call attentional style. And everybody's got a dominant attentional style. And so you think about 3 types of players in the game of golf. That person who's dominated by that broad external type of playing tends to be very instinctive and feel-based player. And so think of a Seve, for example, somebody who just was magical and creative in the way that he played the game, and played it by feel, not much for mechanics. And again, when field players start to struggle, things can really go to hell in a handbasket, right? And so the famous, I think it was St. Andrews of Seve out in the parking lot, basically, and getting up and down on one of the holes from beside a parked car, and that was just him at his best. The second style is much more of a thinking and an analytical style. So maybe you think about a Jack Nicklaus as a guy who was very famous for playing the game strategically, thinking his way around the golf course. And that's an individual who wants to understand the golf swing and have it make sense to them. And then the third style is really much more of that focused, action-oriented style, and that's the person who tends to be very technical in the way that they play the game. So think about a Nick Faldo, or think about the guys who are always tweaking and focused on little tiny things. So those 3 styles are really going to set up how the person approaches the game, and from a coaching standpoint, it provides some really great insight as to how that person is going to best learn. You don't want to take somebody who plays by feel and try to turn them into a mechanic. By the same token, you don't want to take somebody who's very good technically and get them thinking too much about things. So the test is really great at being able to illustrate that and what dominates that concentration style. And it's the same thing that's applied in the military as well as in the business world. How is that strength going to support what you do, and where is it going to get in the way? So
in that sense, is it, once that assessment's complete and you understand their dominant attention style, right? Would the player or athlete be best served developing the weaker parts of their attention style, or really figuring out how you can maximize your dominant side?
I think it's both. I think it's both. So somebody who is kind of oblivious to what's going on around them, doesn't have good awareness. Certainly, their game is going to benefit from getting a little bit better at that. Or somebody who isn't great on focusing on details and getting really down into the nitty gritty, their performance could probably be improved a little bit by enhancing that. What you're looking at is what are the demands being placed on the person in their performance environment. If I'm the CFO of a large corporation, the psychological demands that are being placed on me are very different than somebody who's trying to make money on the PGA Tour. The environment and the game you're playing is what determines what's needed. And then we take a look at what you bring on board with your mental game and say, okay, well, this is going to help because this is important in the environment. But what's also important is something that maybe you're not all that strong in. And that becomes an area of improvement. Typically, what we're trying to do with the concentration piece of it is eliminate a tendency towards getting distracted. So the test also measures, are you making mistakes because your mind wanders? And there are different types of distractions. One is, something's going on around me, like a squirrel just ran by, right? Or a shiny object. And all of a sudden now I'm focused on that. And I don't really get paid to watch squirrels. And so if I'm paying attention to the squirrel, I can't be paying attention to what I'm supposed to be paying attention to. There are internal distractions. I talked before about the nonsense that goes on, all of that thinking. If I'm caught up thinking about those things, I'm not paying attention to what I ought to, and I'm likely to make a mistake as a result of it. And then there's a tendency to get distracted by little minutia that doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but it seems very important to your mind, and you can't let it go. And usually what's driving that is some type of emotion. I'm upset, I'm angry, I'm scared, whatever it is, but that object of that emotion is what I'm locked onto, and I can't I can't let it go. And I can't be paying attention to more than one thing at a time. That's an important element of that concentration theory. If I'm on channel 1, I can't be on anything else. If I'm focused on something that's irrelevant, I can't focus on something that is relevant and is going to get in my way. There was a very famous psychological research study done years ago called the white bear study. And what they did was they had two groups of participants in the experiment, so a control group and an experimental group. And both had the same task. They were given a list of 15 words and given 2 minutes to memorize those 15 words. And at the end of 2 minutes, the list was taken away and they had to recall how many of those 15 words were up here in memory. Okay? And so the control group was basically said, here's your 15 words, you get 2 minutes. When it's done, we're gonna ask you to recall as many as you can. With the experimental group, they said the same thing, but they added in at the end, they said, oh, and by the way, we know from previous research that you can't allow yourself to think about white bears while you're focusing on memorizing the words. Well, as you might imagine, when the testing was all done, the control group did way better in terms of the recall. And when they talked to the experimental group, it was like, why do you think you didn't do it any better? And most of them said it's because I couldn't help but sit there and think about white bears as I was trying to do it. So that's an example of that kind of nonsense distraction, things that's not relevant. And what's important to understand is the way that you eliminate that is not by fighting it. It's by basically noticing it, saying to yourself, isn't that interesting that I'm thinking about white bears? But what I really need to be doing right now is thinking about this over here, as opposed to going, I'm not going to allow myself to think about white bears, which is only going to guarantee that the white bears are dominating your mindset. So a little rabbit hole there.
So the solution to the nonsense is awareness.
Exactly.
And then are there any tools that you provide that allow you to just let the white bear walk away?
Without question, the best tool for strengthening your ability to be focused on the right things at the right time is mindful meditation. It is like taking your brain to the gym. It's not about necessarily relaxation, although it might help you relax. It's not about stress relief. It's about teaching your brain how to be aware of what it is it's paying attention to. And when it gets distracted, and it will, how to notice that and then refocus yourself on what's important. So most mindful meditation is really just focusing on your breathing. Okay? So there are probably 100 different smartphone apps that you can download these days. There's one called Calm. There's a big ecosystem called Headspace. And so you've got your smartphone, you pop your earbuds in, and you go through a 5-minute, 10-minute meditation. Most of them, again, are focused on just pay attention to your breathing. And so you start it out, and within very short order, you're going to notice that you're thinking about anything but your breathing. And what's important is you don't fight that. You just notice it, come back to focus on it. And for people, athletes, soldiers, business people who do that, they see a dramatic improvement in their ability to stay focused on the right things at the right time. Notice when they get distracted. It won't eliminate your propensity to be distracted. What it's going to do is it's going to help you notice that before it causes you performance problems, and then reorient yourself. So regardless of who we're working with, that is always one of our prescriptions, is you need to do that. And you bring that up in a room full of special operations guys, and the eyes start to roll, right? And they're imagining you're going to put the whale music on next, right? And everybody's going to hug. And I basically say, look, I know it sounds silly. I know you probably think it's bullshit, but here's my challenge to you. Do it for 30 days, once a day, 5 minutes for 30 days. And at the end of those 30 days, if you don't notice a difference, talk to me, because you'll be the first one that has ever committed to it and hasn't noticed it making a difference for them. And to this day, no one's come back after 30 days of actually doing it and said, I don't think it works for me.
Sure. Meditation is an interesting one. I use the Waking Up app, Sam Harris's app, which is more guided meditation. And there's a lot of, I found when I was trying to get into it a couple years ago, it was very confusing. because there's all these prescribed sort of theories. This is the best way to do it. There's mindful meditation, which it sounds like you're recommending, which is you just let the thoughts go and you pay attention to them. You watch them as they come and go, and try to maintain focus on something as simple as breathing. And there's also another school of thought that's like, no thoughts at all. Shut that engine down right away. Is there a better way, one or the other, to do it? Is there a prescribed time that you would recommend doing it a day?
5 to 10 minutes. And people who are disciplined enough to do it first thing in the morning or last thing in the day, find a time that it's difficult to make an excuse not to do it, and just carve that out, just like anything else you do. And I'm much more of the school of it being very difficult to shut off thinking. Your brain is a 24/7 kind of thing. That's what it's designed to do, and it can't help itself but think. So I'm much more of the school where you notice thoughts that are irrelevant and you let them go, because they're just thoughts. Our brain tends to treat them as if they are, important markers of reality. We've got to think about them. And they're not. They're just cognitive representations of something in your mind, and you can let them go if you choose to. Accept them, don't fight them, just let it go. And by refocusing yourself on something else, coming back to the breath. So you're standing there and you're coming down 18, and for the first time in your career, you've got an opportunity to win. That person is not going to be able to shut off their thinking. They're just not. They're not going to be able to, all the deep breathing in the world is not going to be enough to reduce the level of physiological arousal that's going on in that player. They've never been there before. This is a big deal. It's a life-changing moment. You can't convince your brain that it isn't. But being able to sort of redirect your attention to something that is more irrelevant, have your caddy talk to you, do something to pull you out of that, because you can't be focused on having that conversation with him and be inside your head going, oh, I don't know, I'm never going to get this chance again. I've never been here before. What's this going to be? That if you're thinking about those kind of things, you're not where you need to be, and God help you at that point. So again, being able to redirect it towards something else is really the key under that circumstance.
Did you watch the U.S. Open?
I did.
Okay. I found it interesting. I read a quote about Wyndham Clark's sports psychologist, and this kind of goes into that was the concentration piece. I want to get into the interpersonal side and what you said about doubt. And he looked for the last 5 holes. I thought it was the wheels were going to come off after he hit the 3-wood on 14, which is just absolutely, buttoned it. He pulled one on 15. He pulls a drive. He misses a couple putts. His stroke started to look jabby. And what his sports psychologist was telling him was that every time he heard a clap for Rory or Ricky that day, to get cocky, to play cocky, And so I had never really heard that strategy be employed. When you're that scene you just painted of a guy coming down 18 trying to win a tournament and he can't calm his mind. I'm wondering what you make of that. That tactic or that strategy of like almost leaning into ego or something.
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting one. I mean, again, cockiness, confidence. Those are confidence is really the difference between being in the zone and freaking out, right? Because the biggest source of pressure is uncertainty, doubt. Confidence is the cure for that. The problem is, if you don't have anything to really be confident or cocky about, you're screwed, right? You can't kid yourself into it. So by saying play cocky, it's telling an elite level athlete, get back to playing the game the way you can play it. Don't worry about anything else. Just be confident. But you got to have the skills to back that up. It's got to be based in reality. You can't fake it till you make it. And confidence, the age-old question, what comes first? Successful performance or confidence? And I think they kind of develop simultaneously. You can't just sit around and think confidently until you've got some actual results to back that up. And sometimes it's difficult to get the results when you're operating from a place of having lower levels of confidence. But so again, working with athletes, working with anybody else is basically getting them back to, well, what do you feel confident in? Where are you good at things. You don't want to be in a pressure situation and trying to do something that you've never done successfully before. That's going to be very difficult to pull off. If you pull it off, it'll be more due to luck or divine intervention than anything else. And so I'll tell amateur golfers, don't ever try to hit a shot that you don't believe that you're capable of hitting. You know, if you can't hit a 3-wood 220 yards in the air and carry water, don't try that. Or if you want to try it, go ahead, but don't be pissed if you don't pull it off. Hit a shot that you know you can confidently execute. And if you get outside of that, that's where practice comes in. That's where you really ought to be getting out of your confidence or comfort zone and developing things to sort of expand, well, what am I confident that I can do? That makes sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, confidence is a strange one, and I think it's definitely a strange one in golf because it comes and goes so quickly. Right. I always when I played competitively when I was younger and in college, I always used to get upset at the just play confident, mantra. Just be confident. Stand up there with water on one side and OB on another side and just stripe it. It's like I'm hitting it like shit. Like I don't have anything to be confident. I know where this ball is going once I stand over it.
Right.
And so I'm glad you said you can't think your way through it. What would be some ways that I'm much more the belief that you have to give yourself reasons to be confident, and then performance leads, and then confidence sort of follows. What would be some strategies you would use with someone whose their physical capabilities are there, but they're lacking in the confidence piece?
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a lot of instances, I think the key is to stay focused on what you actually have control over.
Okay. A stoic theory.
Yeah. And there's so many things when you're playing golf that you don't have control over. Speaking of the U.S. Open, you think about the low amateur and his last putt on 18 that went in the hole and came back out of the hole. That's just the rub of the green. And that kind of shit happens all the time. You hit a great shot, you get a bad bounce. There's so many things you don't have control over. But at the end of the day, there's always two things that you have absolute control over: your level of effort and your attitude. And so one of our prescriptions for folks is play hard and play with a smile on your face. Enjoy yourself. Be the kind of person that other people want to play with because you got a great attitude. I've played so many rounds of golf in my life, I lost count of them. I would much rather play with somebody who's a mediocre player but is fun to play with than somebody who's a great player and is a pain in the ass to be with on the golf course. But so I'd ask you the question, based on all of your competitive golf experience, when you've gone out and you've done your best from an effort perspective, and in golf, effort isn't so much isn't like playing middle linebacker. It's much more about commitment to the shot, commitment to staying focused, commitment to whatever. But just you have control over that, and doing it with a good attitude. Would you prescribe to the notion that when you do play with max effort and you do play with a good attitude, you're much more likely to get good results?
That is a tricky one because I could be accused of trying too hard, playing too hard.
Right.
I do believe that, there's something, I saw the opposite where kids don't have their best stuff and they turn a average or poor round into a really bad round, into a nightmare. And
Right.
I was always of the belief, like, I don't care how bad it's going, if I'm now 6 over, I need to finish the day at 5 over or 7 over or whatever it is. I got to get everything I can out of this round. And I think it hurt in some senses because the days where it's the best are the days where it's just free flowing.
Right.
There's no result based thinking to it, not married to an outcome.
Right.
And that's a difficult place for someone that cares to really get to.
Sure.
So the days I would say that, the prescribed, attitude is enjoying yourself, having fun, but the effort, it feels effortless.
Right.
It feels
exactly.
effortless. You're not trying to play hard.
Right. That's what I say. So for a sport like golf, it isn't about, this kind of effort. It really is about committing yourself to staying focused, committing yourself to using your pre-shot routine. When people aren't playing well, They just want to get things over with. And so they'll stop doing those things. And the pre-shot routine is sort of your opportunity to get yourself in as comfortable a place as you can. It's an anchor, if you will. And it's associated with you hitting good golf shots. And so you've got to define what the kind of effort really is going to matter for you, but you do have control over that. As opposed to a lot of other things. You don't have control over outcome. If you're trying to get from 6 over to 5 over, it's not as though that's an irrelevant goal, but staying focused on doing that, measuring yourself based on that is going to lead to more problems than anything else. I think one of the cool things about golf as a sport is it isn't about going out and hitting perfect shots. What did Hogan say? That if in a round of golf he hit 2 exactly the way he wanted to, he'd be happy. It's about getting the ball in the hole in as few strokes as possible. That's what the game is. And whether you've got your A game that day or your C game, the nature of the sport hasn't changed. Get the ball in the hole in as few strokes as possible. I think back in his heyday, that was something that Tiger did better than anybody else. Was that it was for him? It was always a competitive sport, and whether he had his best swing that day or not, he was just still focused on getting the ball in the hole. Where a lot of other guys are out there, and they're lost in mechanics and trying to make perfect swings. It's sort of like, you don't have to make a perfect swing to get the ball in the hole. So.
Although he did have some stuff that goes against the grain of what we're talking about. He's kind of he oftentimes picked out numbers before a round that he wanted to shoot that day.
Sure.
If he's at 18 under for a tournament, he expects, or if he's at 6 under for the day and he makes bogey on 14, he expects to be 6 under or lower by the end of the round.
Right.
So he seemed to have some sort of, gear. Now, whether or not once he gets into the actual process, he starts back from the ground level and he goes into that process and leaves that number at the door is,
right.
Who can say?
Yeah. I mean, everybody, whether you're a 15 handicapper or you're the best player that's ever played, is trying to improve. Right? They're trying to get better. It's just, what does getting better look like for you? And, just to keep it interesting sometimes, because he played so well, the things he focused on were crazy. Then nobody else was focused on those kind of things. Yeah. But that was his way of challenging himself. I remember playing down the road here one day. I played 9 holes with a touring professional, and I just watched in amazement as he hit every fairway and every green effortlessly. And, I was talking to him throughout the round, and I was just sort of like, it's amazing. You've hit every green. But he said, but I'm not hitting the green where I need to. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, just being on the green isn't going to be good enough. He said, I'm trying to get the ball within 10 feet of the hole every time, because that's the difference for me between having a hamburger for dinner and having a steak for dinner. And so as those expectations always have to be geared to what are you actually capable of? And that's how you improve, is by setting some expectations and going out and working hard to do that. But they've got to be within the realm of possibility for you. The 15 handicapper who gets pissed because he hits a drive out of bounds is being silly. You're going to do that when you're a 15 handicapper. Can you practice and try to get better and eliminate some of those? Absolutely. And then your handicap will go from 15 to 12. But even as a 12, you're going to miss some shots. Why is that going to ruin your day? Just accept it, move on, and recognize that over the course of a round, you're probably going to hit more shots that are close to what you want than really horrible outcomes.
Sure.
So again, the difference between feeling good about something and feeling shitty about something is the delta between what I expected and what actually ended up happening.
Sure.
Right?
Yep. Expectations around everything.
Right.
What? Let's go back to the doubt piece. You mentioned it earlier. I find the doubt thing interesting because it feels like, from an outsider looking in at sort of the best of the best in whatever field you want, that self-doubt or seems to drive a part of the engine. If you were so sure about everything, you might be, a sociopath. I'm not sure.
Sure.
So the doubt piece seems to me that it drives part of the engine that gets you there, but you also say that doubt, kills a lot of performance.
Sure.
So what is the truth about doubt? How is it? leveraged? How is it weaponized? And how is it a hindrance?
Sure. So one of the elements that gets measured with our assessment is it measures your level of confidence. Okay, can't really tell from looking at the number whether that's real or whether that's something you're imagining is how confident you are. But in a few short minutes of talking to somebody or watching them perform, I'll know how realistic that number is. But another thing that gets measured on the test is the level of self-critical thinking that you do. An absence of any type of self-critical thinking, you get people who are complacent, who believe that there really isn't anything to be doubtful of, and it's sort of an unrealistic type of confidence. Get somebody who's grossly self-critical, and now you've got somebody who can't eliminate the negative thinking when they have to. So there's a sweet spot in there where, for an athlete, you've got to have a certain amount of self-doubt in order to motivate yourself to go out and work hard. One of my former business partners at Winning Mind did a ton of work in professional baseball, and what he discovered, he would use TACE to evaluate potential draft picks. So gathered thousands and thousands of profiles of young baseball players, and then analyzed of these folks over the span of about 10 years, how many of them actually made it to the big leagues, because that number is really small. Baseball, they draft a zillion people in the hopes that maybe they get 2 or 3 of them to the major league level. And one of the discriminating factors is that level of self-criticalness. That without it, it was a very small chance that a player was going to make it from draft to the major leagues. With too much of it, there was also a small chance that they were going to make it. Yeah. There was a sweet spot in there. And that became one of the things that he started to look for when recommending to player personnel folks that here's somebody that's probably going to work hard at things. So it is an interesting thing. You want to have the ability to, when you're performing, not be focused on what's wrong and what you're doubting on. That's a different type of it. And it's sort of like situational self-criticalness. When you're away from the performance arena, are you evaluating yourself in a stringent manner and being hard on yourself without it becoming this sort of domineering voice in your head? Because it can wear you out after a while. And it's also one of the markers of somebody who becomes sort of destructively perfectionistic, where things are never good enough. I'm never satisfied. That can wear people out emotionally over time, particularly when perfection, number one, isn't possible. If you're using that as your benchmark, you're going to be forever disappointed. And if it's not necessary, it's sort of like, why are you beating yourself up about those kind of things? Well, that's what motivates me. It's like, yeah, but it also is wasting energy and enjoyment opportunities. But if you want to be an elite performer, having some degree of, I could be better, I'm not good enough, is an important motivator, and that's true for athletes. It's true in the military. It's also true in the business world. Those folks that are just relentless about getting better at whatever it is that they get paid to do.
What's easier to correct, the person whose negative voice has become the dominant voice, or the complacent person?
Gee, it's a great question.
Are they both lost causes?
No.
Okay.
No, because the person who is unrealistically cocky won't listen to any kind of coaching advice. The person who's relentlessly self-critical is all about feedback, because at their core, they don't think that they're good enough. And so there's some interesting stuff. There's something called the imposter syndrome, right? That person who I'm not really good enough to be here. Well, the imposter syndrome is somebody who will keep working hard to get better, because they want to eliminate that all of those thoughts that are associated with being an imposter. The person who's unrealistically cocky and confident doesn't think that there's anything to work on in the first place, and so won't listen to feedback. And that's almost like a marker of what's actually insecurity. The person that's running around beating their chest telling you how great they are is usually the person that is going to fall apart when things get real, because they're using that type of false confidence as a protective mechanism against their inner feelings of insecurity. So narcissistic people are a great example, right? That it's the ultimate in kind of egotism. While at the core of a narcissist is somebody who is cripplingly insecure, but they're just using those behaviors to protect themselves against any type of criticism, external or internal. So I'd much rather work with the person who's too self-critical and trying to get better. It's not going to be easy, but at least they'll try, as opposed to trying to wake this person up with, by throwing cold water over their head. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
What do you know? What do we know about those insecurities that create the overly self-critical person? And like, what is that probably you have to put your clinical psychologist hat back on to solve for that, right? I mean,
Sure.
This could be deep-seated, childhood stuff or whatever it may be.
It's probably a combination of nature and nurture. People whose temperament are just kind of high-strung and sort of, it used to be called kind of neurotic, combined with having grown up in an environment where you were told things were never quite good enough, or you felt like things were never quite good enough. That's typically what produces that kind of extreme level. It's the two. You don't usually get people who are laid back, and Snoop Dogg, for example, is not going to be relentlessly perfectionistic, right? He just doesn't have the temperament to be able to pull that shit off. But you can think of others who are much more like Keegan Bradley, for example. You could imagine him being, no offense, Keegan Bradley's an elite level athlete, but you can just tell he's much more high strung.
He's an anxious guy.
Yeah, than Snoop Dogg is, or Bubba Watson, who's been interviewed a number of times and talks about just how socially anxious he is. You can sort of see it. He's kind of a cool moving guy, but you can tell when he's out there that there's a part of him that's a little bit uncomfortable about certain things, not hitting golf shots, but just the social piece of it. So I'm not sure how Snoop Dogg worked his way into it.
But he is a tremendously productive person. If you look at his career, which is I always find interesting.
Right.
I'm like, this guy's stoned,
right,
and highly productive, and always got a scheme going on,
right.
For movies and stuff. So yeah, I guess there's different ways to accomplish it. I was more so curious, like, if you have to treat the underlying insecurities in order for that person to show any progress.
Yeah, and there's a fine line when you do this kind of work between staying focused on performance and getting into more clinical or therapeutic types of things. I'm a believer that we can solve for some of the performance issues without having to put a person on the couch in order to do that. In fact, part of the ethics of what we do is staying focused on that. And if a person is really struggling legitimately with some mental health issues, making sure that they get treated by the appropriate people who specialize in that. It's very difficult, I think anyway, to be a great clinician and then also be great at doing the performance enhancement work. And one of the things I had to learn how to do back in the day, because what you get used to when you're being trained as a clinical psychologist is you see, mental instability everywhere where you look. Right? That's what you have to be good at picking up on. And all of a sudden, everybody seems like they've got mental health issues. Well, they don't. That's just what you're used to seeing. So you have to be careful not to pathologize everything that you're seeing. And so when you make that leap from seeing people who are legitimately mentally ill to folks who are just struggling with life or performance something in life, you can't fall back on turning it all into clinical issues. So I think you can get at some of those, the confidence issue without having to solve for lifelong insecurities.
So we talked about concentration, we talked about confidence. There's a third C to this package.
Sure.
Commitment.
Let's
talk about commitment.
Commitment, commitment can take various forms, but at its very simplest, it's basically don't quit, stay in the game. The first unit that I was a part of that I talked about before, the helicopter pilots, their motto is Night Stalkers don't quit, NSDQ, and then you have that sort of emblazoned into your mind on day one of being a part of that unit. No matter what's going on, stay in the game. And you think about some of the great stories that have come out of the world of sport over the year. That everything is lost and somehow they come back to win. The Patriots against the Falcons in the Super Bowl, right? It's 28-3. I think there's like 8 minutes to go in the third quarter. Patriots fans like myself and my children were like despondent, ready to jump out the window. And the Patriots didn't quit. and they stayed in the game and they won the game. And it's those types of stories that are at the essence of it. Well, one of the best predictors of who makes it through some of the military selection courses is essentially who won't quit. No matter what happens, don't quit. You've always got a chance as long as you can stay in the game. But the moment that you raise your hand and give up, that's it. You've determined the outcome. So commitment is basically stay in the game, whatever that means. Whether it's keep putting one foot in front of the other, even though you're dehydrated and you haven't slept, or whatever the case may be. Stay in the game. It can also get down to a much more micro level, and that is commit yourself to the shot that you're going to hit on the golf course, and go ahead and do it. Commit yourself to going out to practice and work on something. That's also a part of commitment. But at the core of it, it is do whatever you've got to do to stay in the game and give yourself a chance to win. The seductive thing about quitting is that it's reinforcing, because we tend to quit when things aren't going very well. It's painful, right? We're like, oh, geez, this sucks. Where's the exit ramp here? And when you take the exit ramp, it's actually reinforcing, because now the pain of everything that was not going right is all of a sudden alleviated momentarily, right? All of a sudden things are better because you're not out there. So if you're on the 12th hole and your game is just shit that day and you're miserable, well, if the 12th hole is convenient enough that you can walk in from there, it's going to take you out of that misery. But it's also going to start to build a pattern of every time that things get tough, you're looking for the exit ramp, because anything that's reinforcing is something that you'll go back to because it worked for you. It accomplished something positive. So having that quitting mindset, it tends to be very self-destructive, and it gets stronger over time. So don't quit. Stay in the game. If they've got to carry you off the 15th green because you've just collapsed physically and mentally, fine. That's not the same thing as quitting. But walking in after 12, that's going to start to build a pattern. And every time that things aren't going well for you on the golf course, you're going to be thinking about how far is it to the clubhouse right now, because that feels better than hanging in there and trying to make something out of what's going on.
So it's less about the action in the moment and more about the pattern that it creates long term. For having, for lacking that commitment to being able to stay in the game. Just play till the end. Are there indicators in your screening process that flag, say, this person might have commitment issues? Or is it a difficult? I imagine that's kind of a difficult one to.
Yeah, and that's where when you talk about athletes, you talk about military people that are getting to the elite level. It's those preliminary gates that they have to get through that give you some metric of their level of commitment. Are they putting in the work necessary to keep moving up the ladder? There aren't very many individuals that are so naturally talented that they can get to the top without working hard in order to get there. So those are parts of it, and a lot of the military selection courses put you through very challenging physical and mental activities where it's easy to quit if you lack commitment. And in many of them, if you quit, that's it. You won't be invited back for a second chance.
Sure. Let's I'd like to talk about pressure a little bit and just kind of drill a little bit deeper down. We've flirted with it a little bit. What do we understand about performing under pressure as far as what goes on, physically or neurochemically or in that stuff? And what is it? I think we're all sort of drawn to the people that consistently perform their best, almost rise. Mm-hmm. They're rare. And it's captivating to watch and to root for. What do you see in those people that others just don't have?
Sure. So I think understanding that pressure. Think of pressure as being a little bit like a Goldilocks metaphor. All right. So there's the kind of pressure that's just right. There's the kind of pressure that isn't enough, and there's the kind of pressure that there's too much of. So think of it as being kind of in three zones. Sure. The just right part of it, that's a component of being in a flow state. You're under an ideal type of pressure, and the thinking tends to shut off. Things become more automatic. Things become less effortful, and that's the gold standard of what everybody's trying to accomplish. It's difficult, though. You're much more likely to be in one of the other two Goldilocks zones, either where you're not feeling enough pressure or you're feeling too much of it, and that exists for all of us. What creates pressure and ends up going into those three zones tends to be three elements. And so let's say that you're trying to make a putt. You've got a 4-foot putt. Okay, you're trying to make a putt. The things that go into that outcome is how important is it to make that 4-foot putt. Right? If you're practicing on a Sunday afternoon and you're practicing 4-footers, that 1 4-footer that you're hitting has some importance, but it's not the same as being on the 18th hole of the club championship and you've got a 4-footer. The importance level is dramatically different, right? As importance of the outcome goes up, so too does the level of pressure that you're experiencing. Mm-hmm. Second one is accountability. Is the outcome going to be determined based on what you do or fail to do? So making that 4-foot putt is really on you. Does your caddy want you to make that 4-foot putt to win the club championship? Probably, but his level of pressure isn't nearly as high as yours because he doesn't have the putter in his hand. Right? So as the accountability goes up, so too does the level of pressure. And the final piece of it, and this is really the determination between good pressure and bad pressure, is how high is your level of certainty or confidence that you can make that 4-foot putt. When you are confident or certain that you can do it, your pressure level tends to go down. I'm saying to yourself, I've been practicing 4-footers my entire life. This one's no different. I got this. As opposed to, God, I should have spent more time practicing 4-footers, not taking 5-footers for gimmies. Now I got to make a 4-footer to win the club championship. That guy's pressure is going through the roof. So good pressure and the kind of pressure that elevates your ability to perform up to your potential it's important, it's on me, and I know I can do it. And that's where you see the cream of the crop people have that mindset. They want to be in the spotlight when it really matters, and they want to have the ball. But they've got to have done the work and been there before to really have an unflappable sense of certainty that they can do what needs to be done. So you think about a Michael Jordan, for example. Being the guy, always wanted the ball, but had to get to a point where he was certain he was going to be able to do what he needed to do with the ball in those big moments. And then once you start doing that, it starts to become something that just is routine. But even somebody who's able to operate at that level, if we can take them into a place that they don't feel that level of certainty, and it's still important, it's still on them, now they're battling with the kind of pressure that is going to be inhibiting their ability to be their best. That's where sort of the fight or flight mechanism comes in. Okay, the level of self-doubt starts to create all of those physiological and psychological components of the fight or flight. Your body's getting ready to do battle to survive. If not do battle, then to turn around and get the hell out of there as quick as you can because it thinks that it's a life or death moment. Now for a golfer, you're standing over that 4-footer and you can literally see the putter grip melting in your hand because you're grabbing a hold of it just that tightly. You're not going to make your best stroke under those kind of conditions. So that's that's the type of pressure that we tend to think about. But the not enough pressure can be equally destructive to performance. When you think that what I'm doing today doesn't really matter, it's not important, you're probably not going to really put your best work in. Or if you're not feeling accountable, I'm the number 5 player on my high school team. I don't have to be the guy that shoots the lowest score. That can take your pressure level down too low. Or if you've got an abundance of certainty. So again, that cocky, overly confident person who thinks that their shit doesn't stink. They're down here in this low zone where they're flat, they're sloppy, because basically their brain just isn't engaged. Yeah. Up here, your brain is overly engaged because it thinks that your life is on the line. Down here, it feels like there's nothing that matters, and so I'm just going to take a vacation day today. And the performance decrements can be equally crippling down here. When you're out there and you just know you're not into it that day, you got to do something if you want to play your best golf. You got to psych yourself up. We tend only to think about psyching myself down. I'm gripping it too tight. I'm freaking out here. I'm losing it. And I got to calm down. What's interesting is you can use breathing techniques to accomplish both goals. You can use breathing techniques as a way of sort of psyching yourself up. You can certainly use self-talk as well as a way of psyching yourself up when you're feeling flat and complacent and lazy. And by the same token, you can use breathing and self-talk to sort of try to calm yourself down a little bit physiologically so that you can settle in and be a little bit more automatic with whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Isn't that interesting? So not enough pressure, bad. Too much pressure, bad. I guess in that theory, if you are standing over a putt to win a tournament and your livelihood depends on it, and you're not a good putter, you're going to have a lot of issues.
Sure.
Yeah. Which we see quite a bit.
Yep.
You know? So talk to me about breathing. I had breathing and self-talk in the list of things I wanted to bring up to you. How does that work in especially, I think we all know to a certain degree, deep breathing to decrease pressure. What about the psych ourselves up part?
Yeah. So there's a part of your nervous system. You know, we tend to think of our nervous system as brain and spinal cord. It controls our thinking, controls our physical movements. Well, there's a part of your nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. It has two components to it: sympathetic and parasympathetic. This is kind of psychology, physiology 101 stuff. The autonomic nervous system is operating on an unconscious level all the time, and it's regulating essentially how physiologically aroused your body is. And sympathetic nervous system is what kicks in with the fight or flight. Your brain notices some sort of threat, and now a bunch of stuff happens. Your heart rate goes up. You start to breathe more rapidly, shallow. Your muscles tense up. Blood tends to flow towards the core, and your hands and feet get cold. All of those things are preparing your body to try to win that fight or flight for survival. The parasympathetic nervous system is what kind of calms you down. It lowers the level of physiological and psychological arousal that you're doing. And so it's associated with slowing down your heart rate, slowing down your breathing. And one of the best ways to engage the autonomic nervous system is breathing. Either breathing in a manner that is sort of trying to rev your body up, or breathing in a manner that tends to want to calm it down. And so we'll use an imagery exercise of imagining that your breathing is actually operating through a hole in your chest. It's like you got a chimney for your breath, right? Okay. So you're going to breathe in through the chimney, you're going to breathe out through the chimney. So how aggressively you're breathing in and breathing out is going to activate one or the other part of that. If I'm freaking out, I need to focus on air coming through that chimney at a very slow rate, staying in there for a little while, and then exhaling at a slow rate. What in the military, they call tactical breathing. So breathe in to a count of 4, hold it for a count of 4, breathe out smoothly through a count of 4. But imagine that it's going out through this pipe as opposed to, where it's actually happening. If on the other hand, I'm feeling flat and lazy, I can use that by breathing more aggressively, really drawing in that breath, and then, exploding it back out as a way of activating one or the other side of that autonomic nervous system. So that's why the breathing piece of it can be helpful in terms of managing, not enough pressure, too much pressure.
Are you familiar with the name Dan Gelata?
Yes.
Okay. So I was playing in a qualifier for the Florida Open. This must have been 5-6 years ago, down here at the King and the Bear. Mm-hmm. And the night before the tournament, Dan, I was with Dan, and he said, if you have a big putt tomorrow, I'd been struggling with the putter for a while, really my whole golf career. But he said, if you have a big putt tomorrow, try to take the putter back in between heartbeats. Something that we used to use in the Army. So on 18, I left myself just the nastiest 5-foot slider downhill. And I tried it. It's the only time I tried it, and it went in the hole. Don't know if it was luck or not, but I thought it was an interesting tactic. So that's breathing. What about self-talk?
Yeah, again, if we're down here in the flat, complacent place. You can use the type of, put Bobby Knight's voice in your head.
Oh God.
I mean, many of your listeners probably don't remember who Bobby Knight is, but Bobby Knight's not going to talk kindly to you as a coach. That internalized voice that is designed to sort of kick you in the ass, and using those types of things. Challenge yourself in some way, shape, or form. Most elite performers, not most, all elite performers are highly competitive individuals. Whether they're trying to succeed in business, sport, or the military, they don't like the notion of not winning. And so tapping into that competitiveness is a great way to psych yourself up, and using that internalized coaching voice. By the same token, you can use a gentler voice. Now, how would, if you're, one of these days you're going to have children, and if you're a 10-year-old who's fallen in love with golf, I wonder why, is out there and is beating himself up because he's not making enough putts, what are you likely to say to that 10-year-old? Right? Not an 18-year-old, but a 10-year-old. You're not going to kick, you shouldn't anyway. Here's a piece of advice. Don't kick 10-year-olds in the ass, all right? Be the positive coach to your child. So how would you talk to your child in this instance as a way of, okay, well, why not talk to yourself that way? Because to talk to yourself like Bobby Knight is only going to freak you out more at this point. So helping people come up with their own sort of coaching scripts, if you will, before they get in the moment, and then be able to draw upon those things. What are my little mantras?
Sure.
Serenity now, right?
Yeah.
As a way of sort of calming yourself down a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a self-analysis piece where you need to figure out where you are in the spectrum,
right?
Obviously.
Yes. And
that's that self-critical thinking. Mm-hmm. And then these tools are just to help you sort of, I guess, float back into somewhere in the middle.
Yes,
right?
that's what you're trying to do. You may not be able to get yourself in that ideal state, but you're doing everything you can to make it easier to perform up to your potential, even though you're not in the ideal state. Yeah. And again, what you tend to see with elite level performers is it takes a hell of a lot more to stress them out than it does for normal people. All right. By the same token, it takes a whole lot more to get them really fired up than it does. So they tend to be at their worst when things aren't stressful for them, and they've got a wide bandwidth for that. They're not freaking out at the drop of a hat. So their curve kind of moves in the direction of a big red zone at the bottom and a smaller red zone at the top, but it's still there.
Okay.
Right? For the typical person, again, it's probably a little bit more balanced between the three areas, but we've got all three areas. By going out and working hard physically, technically, and mentally, what you're doing in essence is creating a place where that green zone in the middle, the ideal zone, tends to get wider. So I'm more often in that ideal state because I've worked hard physically, technically, and have developed some good mental skills in order to widen out that zone. But that doesn't mean that there aren't going to be days when things aren't going right, and I'm feeling the impact of that. So I got to have the skills to be able to do that. But the harder you work at things, the more likely you are to feel the kind of confidence that is such an important determining factor in where you are on that pressure spectrum.
Sure. At Winning Mind in the work that you do, how important or not important is what may be going on physically with the person, either through sleep, diet, nutrition, physical fitness? What sorts of things do you see sort of bubble up to the top when you do all the assessments and you say, well, this may be just something physically that you're doing that's affecting how the mind's working? Sure.
I mean, yeah, all of those things, your diet, your exercise, your sleep, are super important because it's the stronger your body is, the more resilient it is to the impacts of stressful situations. If you're in poor shape, you got poor diet, you're not sleeping well, your body's just not capable of handling the same level of stress, and it's likely to break down. It's one of the cool things about this Whoop device is it measures those kinds of things, and it will tell somebody, hey, today's a day when your body's ready to handle a lot of stress and strain, or today's a day not to push yourself because your body's not really gonna be ready for that, and you're likely to overtrain. So yes, paying attention to those things to the best of your ability. You don't have to be an elite level athlete to have it impact you. That business person that's spending too much time, out with clients and not getting enough sleep and not with a great diet is somebody who's making themselves more susceptible to the negative impacts of stress and pressure. It's not going to take as much to push them out of their comfort zone as opposed to somebody who's taking care of themselves.
Okay. So just full disclosure, this podcast is pretty much a selfish endeavor on my part because I want to know these things and I want to bring them back to the golf course.
Sure.
So if you will allow, I'd like to ask you a question about my golf game.
Sure.
And possibly we can sort out what's going on. So for a while now, I have had problems finishing good rounds. Mm-hmm. It's not so much starting them. It is the finding the gear at the end to put them away. Okay, taking it, getting 3-4 under, making another birdie, or just staying there. Okay, things get really hard around the 16th hole if I'm a couple under par for whatever reason. So I've tried a lot of different stuff. I've tried a lot of different mindsets. Whatever. This past week I was 5 under through 14. I finished at 3 under. It happened again. I was very distraught. So I look at guys that have the ability to, when they get in those situations, they stay on the offensive, they stay in the attack. It's almost like now we can go play. I make defensive swings and hit defensive putts. So where would you start with someone like that?
Well, I guess I'd start by asking, what have you tried that hasn't been helpful up to this point?
I have tried sort of simplifying everything. I've tried to, in those 3-hole stretches, when I feel my body actually change and the club change, I've tried to only stick to the shots I absolutely know I can hit, make sort of simplified golf swings, whether it be, if we want to get really technical, choking up on the club, taking more club, hitting shots that I know I really like to hit. I have tried to get super into my process, go super into the pre-shot routine. I have tried to tell myself that I'm going to birdie these last 3 holes and take it even further. I've tried to absolutely rush through it and try to be unconscious. Let's see. Those are some of the ones I've tried.
Okay.
Yeah.
So help me understand for you
Yep.
why the last 3 holes are any different than the prior 15 holes that you've played.
Because the end is in sight, I think, and the scorecard is about to be signed. I see maybe the number in sight. I also feel like, so I'm a feel-based player largely, always have been feel, and I'll actually alternate through feels throughout the round. So it's a continuous. I'm analyzing as I'm going. Okay, that one, we started with this feel that's getting a little too far under the plane. I started with this feel, the swing's getting a little long. I'm getting a little tired. So I'm constantly trying to solve throughout the round, and it gets harder and harder to solve when pressure starts to mount, and for me, and the finish line gets closer and closer. So I think there's also a lot of results-based desire in there to shoot, 66 or, something that is amazing, something I don't do. I've only done once in my life, So, it just for whatever reason, the start of the round doesn't bother me as much. I can make a bogey. My 2 best rounds ever, I started bogey, and then the gloves were off type of thing. So trying to find how to take that feeling into the last 3 holes has been difficult.
Right. Okay. But the what it takes to hit a good tee shot on 17 is no different than what it takes to hit a good tee shot on 6. Right. If it's you've got the same club in your hand.
Yeah.
But for you, it is different.
Yeah.
They're because now you're focused on an outcome, and it's really important to you to be able to achieve that outcome. And so now the pressure in those last 3 holes is starting to take you away from being able to play good golf, as opposed to putting you in a place where you're likely to play good golf. So I think some of the stuff that you've you've tried isn't illogical. It just has not been the right recipe for you to be able to get over it. And so a couple of things that might be helpful. One is to use some imagery exercises when you're not on the golf course and basically take yourself through the last 4 or 5 holes of a round where you've got a chance to shoot something that's going to make you happy as opposed to, be part of the nightmare. And imagine yourself doing it. Part of your problem is you don't really have a track record of being able to do that. And so your level, it's important to you, it's up to you, but your level of certainty and your ability to do it isn't where it needs to be. And sometimes those imagery exercises of seeing because you can control the outcome when you're just imagining what's happening. So imagine yourself walking up 18 and being able to hit the shots you need to hit to achieve whatever outcome is important for you that day. There's a famous study in sports psychology from a million years ago where they had 2 groups, and it was about free throw shooting. And they had one group that just practiced shooting free throws. And then they had another group that practiced shooting free throws, but also used imagery exercises of seeing themselves making free throws. The imagery group ends up being better free throw shooters than the other group is. So giving your mind the experience and feeling all of those things that you would likely feel. I mean, you can't be sitting around next to Snoop Dogg on the beach with a Corona in your hand imagining that you're coming down 18, right? You really got to try to put yourself in that moment and say to yourself, what am I likely to be feeling right now? How's my body likely to feel? And what can I do? Because I'm in full control of this little dream scenario here to imagine myself being able to cope with it and do what I need to do. Okay, that's one thing that you can do. Second thing would be to address the physiological reaction that you're having. Okay, you're because the pressure level is going up. It's important to you. It's up to you. You just don't know that you can do it. You got a history of not being able to do it. Now your body's starting to tighten up, and so get good at using breathing as a way of calming yourself down. Use the self-talk to basically say, this shot I'm about to hit is no different than any other golf shot I've ever hit in my entire life. That's it. Just stay focused on that one shot. Accept whatever the outcome is and go back and hit. That's the beauty about golf, is that it doesn't matter what happened 2 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. What matters is what's going to happen right now. But too often we can't let that go. Can't accept it. Shit, I didn't hit the distance that I wanted to hit it at. What's going on with my swing? What do I need to do to fix that? As opposed to just saying, all right, didn't hit that the way I wanted to. It's fine. I will the next one. But I've got to do the right things in order to be able to do that. So it's a combination of doing some mental practice.
Okay.
Experiencing everything that you will be experiencing in order to perform effectively in those situations where you haven't historically. Utilizing breathing as a way of trying to reduce some of that physiological and perhaps mental pressure, and then using self-talk, basically taking it one shot at a time, and don't get ahead of yourself.
I will use that. I promise. It's the certainty piece. I think that's really, I think if you show yourself that you can do it, and I have done it. If I shoot 41 on the front, I can go bonkers afterwards because then there's none of that. Just winding down.
Sure.
Do you say you're doing all the right things, or not all the right things, but you're putting some of these methods into practice? How do you see that progress reveals itself to the individual? Is it different for everyone? Is it instant, constant, linear, slow, and then all at once? How do we know that we're getting better at some of these things?
Well, at the end of the day, performance improves somehow, some way. You're doing your job better or more consistently, playing up to your potential is what we're really looking for. Your personality's not changing. None of that is happening. You're just successful more often than you were in the past. And sometimes, depending on where you started, that progress can be seen relatively quickly. Sometimes it takes, a little bit longer in order to get there. But at the end of the day, it's your performance that we're trying to improve upon. Get you to the place where you're able to perform up to your physical and technical abilities. And recognize that the mental piece of it is just supporting what exists there physically and technically. If you really want to get better, you got to get better technically, you got to get better physically. That's in an endeavor where physicality is important, like sport or the military. You got to put in the time to make the body strong and agile and explosive in order to do that. That's why you see the modern day athlete is not John Daly. They're not out carousing. They're taking very good care of themselves because that's such an important component to getting to the elite level and staying there. And they work extraordinarily hard on their games. Even though when you or I look at them, we're like, I'd be on the beach with Snoop if I were you. I wouldn't be grinding it out here in the 90-degree heat working on 3-foot putts, but they do. Again, it's a long-winded way of saying at the end of the day, if you're doing the things you need to do physically, technically, mentally, you have to have faith that your performance is going to get better. If nothing else, for the amateur golfer, the game can be more enjoyable. You ask the typical amateur at your club, why do you play golf? Well, it's fun. Then you go out and play with them and you go, this dude's not having any fun at all. He's miserable. He's paying a lot of money to come out here and be miserable, right?
Yeah.
And yet their goal is to have fun. Well, again, that's something that you have control over. If you're a competitive person and you're not playing well, that's not fun. But it doesn't need to result in you throwing clubs and being a pain in the ass and being miserable, because you have control over that. You notice it, you accept it. You just basically say, okay, it's one of those days. I'm not gonna quit. I'm gonna hang in there, because you never know in this game, right? You never know. And each shot is a new opportunity to hit a great shot, and I'm gonna stay in it, and I'm gonna be positive about things. If for no other reason than I just don't want to, be involved in a road rage incident on the way home because I had a bad day on the golf course.
Sure. I'll leave with this, but in all of your experience working with military athletes, business professionals, how much more capable do you think people actually are than they may give themselves credit for?
Well, again, coming back to that component of part of what motivates and pushes people to be in that upper echelon of performers is that lack of complete satisfaction where I currently am. And so you're much more likely to see that kind of mindset at that high level of you don't give yourself the credit that you need to. Again, the critical question for somebody who does what I do is my inability to give myself credit for what I'm actually capable of holding me back from getting better, or is it pushing me to work to put in the work to actually get better? If it's holding me back, now we've got to get you more in tune with what you're actually capable of. If it's motivating you to work harder in order to get better and get better results, I'm not going to discourage you from doing those kind of things. So it just really depends on what kind of impact. That if it's wearing you out and you're miserable, then we need to kind of get you back a little bit closer to having a self-concept that's rooted in what you're actually capable of, being better to yourself.
Yeah. So, I was going to ask you about how people should start to put a plan together for themselves, but I think you've answered it numerous times here, which is you need some self-analysis. You need to figure out what it is that's holding you back, which side of the spectrum you're on as it relates to pressure and motivation and performance and doubt and all these things, and then start to employ some of these tools and get you back in a...
Absolutely. Again, it starts with, being able to have an accurate picture of where you're at, physically, technically, mentally. That's that self-awareness piece that you're talking about. The second component is then recognizing where you're at on that stress spectrum, okay, in the moment. Am I up too high? Am I just right? Am I too low? And then the final piece of it is then managing yourself more effectively, because I know who I am and I know where I am. Now I have to develop some skills to get myself to where I need to be, where I'm putting my mind and my body in that state where I'm more likely to play my best golf or make my best decisions or, survive another battle. That's kind of it. Regardless of what you do for a living, those three components are kind of the essence of our coaching paradigm with people.
Sure. Well, Dr. Lowry, this has been fascinating, enjoyable. I did not have 3 Snoop Dogg references on my bingo card this morning, but I'm glad we worked it in.
You never know where things are going to go.
Yeah. Thank you for your time, sir.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely.